A snow-covered diner. A freezing old woman no one would help. When young waitress Emma defied her boss to save a stranger, she had no idea the elegant man watching from the corner would reveal a truth that would shatter everything she knew about her past. Like, comment, and subscribe so we can keep sharing stories like this. The wind howled like a wounded animal against the frost-covered windows of Miller's diner, rattling the old glass panes that had witnessed decades of late-night confessions, early morning dreams, and the quiet desperation of people trying to survive in a world that had forgotten them. Emma Parker wiped down the same counter for the third time that evening, her hands raw from the cheap industrial cleaner her boss refused to upgrade, watching as the snowstorm outside transformed the familiar street into an alien landscape of white chaos. At 23 years old, Emma had mastered the art of invisible survival. She had learned to smile through exhaustion, to serve coffee with grace even when her feet screamed in protest, to absorb insults from entitled customers without letting her expression betray the hurt that accumulated like unpaid debts in her chest. The diner uniform hung loosely on her thin frame, a testament to too many skipped meals so her younger brother could eat, too many nights choosing between electricity and groceries. "Table 7 needs a refill," barked Gerald Mitchell, the diner's owner and Emma's personal tormentor for the past 2 years. He was a man whose bitterness had calcified into cruelty, whose failed dreams had transformed into weapons he used against anyone unfortunate enough to depend on him for employment. His bulk filled the doorway between the kitchen and dining area, arms crossed over a chest that had long ago surrendered to gravity and resentment. "Right away, Mr. Mitchell," Emma responded with practiced politeness, grabbing the coffee pot, even though her shift should have ended 30 minutes ago. But she knew better than to mention overtime pay. The last waitress who had complained had been fired on the spot, replaced within hours by someone even more desperate. The diner was nearly empty, as it always was during snowstorms. Only the most desperate or the most lost ventured out in weather like this. Emma moved between the scattered customers with the efficient grace of someone who had learned every crack in the worn linoleum floor, every squeaky booth, every temperamental table leg that needed a folded napkin to stay level. She was refilling the cup of a truck driver who barely acknowledged her existence when the door burst open with a violence that made everyone in the diner turn. A blast of Arctic wind invaded the warm space, bringing with it swirling snow and a figure that seemed more ghost than human. The old woman who stumbled through the doorway was a portrait of abandonment. Her weathered face was red from cold exposure, her lips tinged with blue that spoke of dangerous hypothermia setting in. She wore a thin coat that had probably been elegant decades ago, but now hung in tatters, offering no more protection than tissue paper against the brutal storm. Her hands, gnarled with age and trembling violently, clutched a small bag that seemed to contain everything she owned in the world. "Please," the old woman's voice was barely a whisper, cracked and desperate. "I just need somewhere warm, just for a little while." The diner went silent except for the howling wind and the hiss of the coffee maker. Emma felt her heart constrict as she watched the elderly woman sway on her feet, clearly on the edge of collapse. But before she could move, Gerald's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "No loitering. You need to order something or get out." The old woman's rheumy eyes filled with tears. I lost my purse in the storm. I was trying to get to the shelter on Elm Street, but the snow—" "Not my problem," Gerald interrupted, his face hardening into the expression Emma had learned to recognize. The look of a man who had decided that compassion was a luxury he couldn't afford, even though his luxury car sat in the parking lot, and his vacation photos to tropical destinations covered his office walls. "This is a business, not a charity. Order or leave." Emma watched as the other customers deliberately looked away, suddenly fascinated by their plates, their phones, anything that would excuse them from witnessing this casual cruelty. Even the truck driver who had seemed kind enough wouldn't meet her eyes. It was the unspoken agreement of survival in a harsh world. Don't get involved, don't make waves, protect yourself first. But Emma found herself moving before her mind could calculate the cost. She approached the old woman, who was now visibly shaking, her legs barely supporting her weight. "Ma'am," Emma said softly, gently taking the woman's ice-cold hand. "Come sit down. Let me get you something warm." "Emma!" Gerald's voice exploded across the diner. "What do you think you're doing? Emma guided the elderly woman to the booth nearest the heater, the best seat in the house that was usually reserved for Gerald's friends who got free meals anyway. "I'm doing my job, Mr. Mitchell. Taking care of a customer. She's not a customer if she can't pay." Gerald marched toward them, his face reddening with anger that seemed disproportionate to the situation. But Emma recognized it for what it was. The rage of someone whose authority had been questioned, whose small kingdom had been challenged. "Then I'll pay," Emma heard herself say, even as her mind screamed at the stupidity of the offer. She had exactly $43 in her bank account. Her rent was due in 3 days. Her brother needed new shoes because his toes were literally sticking out of his current pair. But looking at this old woman, at the way her whole body trembled with cold and fear and resignation, Emma couldn't calculate the cost of kindness. "You'll pay?" Gerald laughed, a sound without humor. "With what exactly? Your tips? You barely make enough to cover your own pathetic existence." The words were designed to humiliate, to remind Emma of her place in the social hierarchy that Gerald had constructed in his mind. And they succeeded. Emma felt the familiar burn of shame in her cheeks, but she also felt something stronger: determination. "Yes, with my tips," Emma said firmly. "And I'll add it to my bill at the end of my shift." She didn't wait for Gerald's response. Instead, she moved to the kitchen and prepared a bowl of the hot soup that had been simmering all day, added fresh bread, and poured the largest cup of coffee the diner offered. When she returned to the booth, the old woman was crying silently, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Here you go," Emma said gently, setting the food down. "Take your time. You're safe here." "I can't. You shouldn't." The old woman's voice broke. "You don't know me. Why would you—" "Because someone would do it for my grandmother if she was in trouble," Emma said simply, though the truth was more complex. Her grandmother had died alone in a nursing home that Emma couldn't afford to visit as often as she should have, a guilt she carried like stones in her pockets. As the old woman began to eat with trembling hands, Emma became aware of another presence. In the corner booth that she had somehow overlooked, a man sat watching the entire scene unfold. He was distinguished in a way that seemed out of place in Miller's diner: elegant bearing, sharp features, an intensity in his gaze that spoke of someone who observed everything and forgot nothing. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Emma felt an inexplicable chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. There was something in his expression, recognition, evaluation, that made her uncomfortable. But before she could analyze it further, Gerald was in her face. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he hissed, keeping his voice low enough that customers couldn't hear, but loud enough that the venom was unmistakable. "You think you're better than me? Let me tell you something, Emma Parker. You're nothing. You're a waitress in a third-rate diner barely making minimum wage. You have no right to make decisions about my business." "She was freezing to death," Emma responded quietly, refusing to be intimidated. "I couldn't just let her—" "I don't care if she was on fire," Gerald interrupted. "You don't give away my food without my permission, and you certainly don't contradict me in front of customers. You're fired." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. Fired. The word echoed in her mind, bringing with it a cascade of disasters: unpaid rent, her brother's school fees, the electricity bill, the medical debt from her mother's illness that still haunted her credit score. "Mr. Mitchell, please." Emma heard the desperation in her own voice and hated it. "I'll work extra shifts. I'll pay for everything. Just please don't—" "Get out," Gerald said coldly. "Now. And leave your uniform. I'm not letting you steal anything else from me." The humiliation was complete. Emma stood there, aware of every eye in the diner suddenly watching, aware of how small she had become in this moment. She wanted to scream, to cry, to tell Gerald Mitchell exactly what kind of person he was. But she also needed a reference for her next job, needed whatever final paycheck he might deign to give her. "I'll get my things," Emma said quietly, turning toward the break room. "Wait," a voice stopped her. It was the old woman who had risen shakily from the booth. Despite her obvious weakness, there was suddenly something different about her, a dignity that her circumstances couldn't diminish. "Young lady, I don't know your name, but I need you to know something." "It's Emma," she responded softly. "Emma," the old woman repeated, as if tasting the name. "What you did tonight, the kindness you showed a stranger when it cost you everything, that kind of heart is rare, rarer than you know." Before Emma could respond, the old woman did something unexpected. She pulled from her tattered bag a small, worn photograph and pressed it into Emma's hand. "Keep this," she whispered. "When you're ready to understand, you'll know what it means." Emma looked down at the faded photograph. It showed a young woman, beautiful, radiant, holding a newborn baby. But before she could study it further, Gerald's voice cut through the moment. "This is touching, really, but both of you need to leave. Now." As Emma moved toward the break room to collect her belongings, she was aware of the elegant man in the corner standing up. He walked to the counter with the measured pace of someone who had all the time in the world, and pulled out a wallet that probably cost more than Emma made in a month. "The check for table 12, he said to Gerald, his voice cultured and precise. "And I'd like to cover the meal for the elderly woman as well. Also, I'm curious, do you own this establishment?" Gerald's demeanor changed instantly in the presence of obvious wealth. "Yes, sir, I do. Gerald Mitchell, at your service." "Interesting," the man said, his tone neutral, but somehow devastating. "I've been looking for investment opportunities in this area, but I have a strict policy. I only do business with people who demonstrate integrity. Thank you for helping me make my decision." He placed several bills on the counter, far more than his modest meal would have cost, and turned to leave. But at the door, he paused and looked back at Emma, who had emerged from the break room with her coat and bag. "Miss Emma," he said clearly, ensuring everyone in the diner could hear. "I don't believe we've met formally. My name is Alexander Thornton. I run Thornton Enterprises. We're always looking for people with character and compassion. If you're interested in discussing career opportunities, my card." He handed her an embossed business card that felt heavy with possibility. Then, with a final nod, he walked out into the storm, leaving behind a silence heavy with shock. Emma stood there holding the business card in one hand and the mysterious photograph in the other, her mind trying to process what had just happened. But before she could make sense of anything, the old woman took her hand. "The storm is getting worse," the elderly woman said, her voice stronger now. "I have nowhere to go tonight. The shelters are all full. I tried 3 before ending up here. I don't suppose—" Emma didn't even hesitate. "You can stay with me. It's not much, just a small apartment, but it's warm and safe." "Are you insane?" Gerald exploded. "You just lost your job, and you're taking in a homeless woman?" Emma turned to look at him, and for the first time, she didn't feel small. "Yes, Mr. Mitchell, I am. Because unlike you, I still remember what it means to be human." As they walked out into the blizzard together, Emma supporting the old woman's weight, she had no idea that this single decision would unravel mysteries spanning decades, reveal truths that would shake the foundation of everything she believed about her past, and ultimately lead to a transformation that would affect not just her life, but countless others. The snowstorm raged around them, but Emma felt strangely warm. Sometimes, she realized, doing the right thing is its own reward. But sometimes, the universe has a way of rewarding kindness in ways you never expected. What Emma didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know yet, was that the elegant man who had given her his card and the fragile woman she was helping through the snow were connected by a secret that would change everything. And it all began with a simple act of compassion on the coldest night of the year. The walk to Emma's apartment building was a battle against nature itself. The wind tore at their faces with invisible claws. The snow had accumulated so deep that each step required conscious effort, and the temperature had dropped to levels that made breathing painful. Emma wrapped her arm more firmly around the old woman's frail shoulders, bearing most of her weight as they trudged through streets that had become unrecognizable labyrinths of white. "It's just 2 more blocks," Emma said, though her own teeth were chattering so violently she could barely form words. "Hold on. We're almost there." The elderly woman didn't respond, conserving what little energy she had left. Emma could feel how each step cost her, how her body trembled not just from cold but from exhaustion so profound it seemed to radiate from her bones. For a terrifying moment, Emma worried they wouldn't make it, that they would be found frozen in the morning. 2 more casualties of a city that had learned to walk past suffering without blinking. But then, like a beacon in the darkness, Emma's apartment building appeared through the swirling snow. It was a structure that generous people might call modest, and honest people would call barely habitable. A 5-story brick building that had been old when Emma's grandparents were young, with water stains decorating the exterior like abstract art, and windows that rattled in even gentle breezes. The lobby was barely warmer than the street outside. The building's ancient heating system had given up years ago, and the landlord's solution had been to provide space heaters that tenants had to pay for themselves. Emma guided the old woman to the stairs. The elevator had been broken for months, and began the slow, painful climb to the third floor. "I'm sorry," the elderly woman gasped after the first flight. "I'm slowing you down." "Don't apologize," Emma said firmly, though her own legs were screaming in protest. "We go at your pace. There's no rush." When they finally reached Emma's apartment door, Emma's hands were shaking so badly from cold and exhaustion that she dropped her keys twice before managing to unlock it. The door swung open to reveal a space that was exactly what someone working minimum wage in an expensive city could afford. A studio apartment so small that the bed, kitchenette, and living area all occupied the same cramped room. But it was clean. Despite working double shifts, despite exhaustion that lived in her marrow, Emma had maintained the space with fierce pride. The second-hand furniture was arranged with care, the walls were decorated with library book sale prints, and everything spoke of someone who refused to let poverty define her entirely. "It's not much," Emma said, suddenly embarrassed by the modest space. "But it's warm, and the bed is comfortable, and it's perfect," the old woman interrupted, tears filling her eyes again. "You have no idea. After sleeping in doorways and shelters, this is a palace." Emma felt her throat tighten. She helped the elderly woman to the small sofa, then immediately began adjusting the space heater to its highest setting. "Let me make you some tea. And I have soup, real soup, not instant. My grandmother's recipe." As Emma moved around the tiny kitchenette, she was acutely aware of the old woman watching her with an intensity that felt almost uncomfortable. It was the gaze of someone trying to memorize every detail, or perhaps someone searching for something specific they hoped to find. "What's your name?" Emma asked, as she heated the soup on her ancient two-burner stove. "I realized I never asked." The old woman was silent for so long that Emma turned around, worried she might have fallen asleep or, worse, collapsed. But she was awake, her eyes distant with memories that seemed to cause physical pain. "Margaret," she finally said. "Margaret Thornton." The name hit Emma like electricity. "Thornton? Like Alexander Thornton? The man from the diner?" Margaret's expression became unreadable. "You noticed the last name. Is he your son? Your nephew?" "It's complicated," Margaret said, and something in her tone made it clear she wasn't ready to explain further. "Tell me about yourself, Emma. How did someone so young end up working at that horrible diner?" Emma brought over the tea and soup, settling into the chair opposite Margaret. It was easier to talk about her own story than to push for answers Margaret clearly wasn't ready to give. "I dropped out of college," Emma began, the words still carrying shame, even though she had made peace with the decision years ago. "My mother got sick. Rare neurological condition. The treatment was experimental, expensive, not covered by insurance. My father left when I was young, so it was just me and my little brother, Nathan. You sacrificed your education for your family," Margaret said softly. It wasn't a question. "I didn't see it as sacrifice," Emma replied honestly. "I saw it as necessity. Someone had to work. Someone had to pay the medical bills, keep the apartment, make sure Nathan could stay in school. It was supposed to be temporary, just a semester off, maybe a year. But then Mom died anyway, despite everything." Emma's voice cracked on the last word, the grief still raw despite the time that had passed. "She died, and we were left with nothing but debt. Medical debt that followed me like a shadow. No degree, no prospects, no way to get a job that paid more than minimum wage." "And your brother?" "Nathan is 15 now. Smart kid. Too smart for the school he goes to, but I can't afford anything better. He wants to be an engineer. Builds things from scraps he finds. Computers, robots, contraptions that shouldn't work but somehow do. He's brilliant, Margaret. He deserves every opportunity I never had." "So you work yourself to exhaustion to give them to him," Margaret observed. "Worked," Emma corrected bitterly. "Past tense. Thanks to my impulsive decision to help you, I'm now unemployed with rent due in days and no prospects." She hadn't meant it to sound accusatory, but Margaret's face crumpled with guilt. "I'm so sorry," the elderly woman whispered. "I've ruined your life." "No," Emma said quickly, immediately regretting her tone. "Margaret, no. I made my choice. I'd make it again. I was just venting. I'm sorry. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the whistle of wind outside and the hum of the space heater. Then Emma remembered the photograph that Margaret had given her at the diner. She retrieved it from her coat pocket, studying it more carefully now under the apartment's light. The image was faded with age, but the subjects were clear. A young woman, radiantly beautiful, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a delicate blanket. There was something haunting about the photograph, a sense of captured joy that made its aged, worn condition even more poignant. "Who are they?" Emma asked softly. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for the photograph, holding it as if it were the most precious object in the world. "That baby is you, Emma." The words didn't make sense. Emma's brain tried to process them but kept hitting walls of impossibility. "What? No, that can't be." "I don't understand." "The woman in the photograph," Margaret continued, her voice thick with emotion, "is named Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. She was my daughter." Emma felt the world tilting on its axis. "Mitchell? Like Gerald Mitchell?" "Gerald is my son-in-law," Margaret said, and suddenly there was steel in her voice despite her physical frailty. Or was. He and Sarah were married young. Too young, some said, but they seemed happy at first. Emma's mind was racing, trying to connect dots that seemed impossible to connect. "But I don't. My mother was." "You're saying Gerald Mitchell's wife was my mother?" "No," Margaret corrected gently. "Sarah was your birth mother. The woman who raised you, who loved you, who died from that terrible illness. She was your adoptive mother, though I suspect you never knew that." The revelation felt like being pushed underwater. Emma couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything she thought she knew about her identity was suddenly questionable. "That's impossible," Emma whispered. "There must be some mistake." Margaret set down the photograph and took Emma's hands in her own weathered ones. 23 years ago, my daughter Sarah gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. She and Gerald had been trying for years, and when you finally arrived, it should have been the happiest day of their lives. What happened? "Gerald changed," Margaret said, her voice hardening. Or perhaps he simply revealed who he had always been. The moment Sarah came home from the hospital with you, he looked at this tiny, perfect baby and said the words, "I'll never forget. I wanted a son." "A daughter is useless to me." Emma felt sick. The cruelty was so casual, so absolute. "Sarah was devastated," Margaret continued. "She loved you desperately. But Gerald, he made life unbearable. Refused to hold you, refused to help with feedings, acted as if you didn't exist. And then he gave Sarah an ultimatum. Give the baby up for adoption, or he would divorce her and she would get nothing. No money, no support, no way to care for a child alone. So she gave me away," Emma said, the words tasting like poison. "She made an impossible choice," Margaret corrected fiercely. "She found a good family, your adoptive parents, people who desperately wanted a child but couldn't have one of their own. Sarah made sure you would be loved, cared for, given everything she couldn't provide alone. Did she ever try to contact me?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "She died, Emma. Car accident. Just 6 months after placing you. Gerald told me later that she had been driving to visit you, to see how you were doing, even though the adoption was supposed to be closed. He said she was distracted, crying, that she ran a red light." The apartment fell silent except for the sound of Emma's ragged breathing as she tried to process this impossible information. Her whole life had been built on a foundation that was suddenly revealed to be fiction. "Why?" Emma finally asked. "Why are you telling me this now? Why did you come to that diner specifically?" Margaret's expression became complicated, mixing shame and determination. "I didn't come there by accident, Emma. I've been watching you from a distance for years. I'm your grandmother. After Sarah died, I tried to find you, but the adoption was sealed. Gerald blocked every attempt I made. He said you were better off never knowing about us, that I should let you live your life. But you didn't," Emma said. "I couldn't," Margaret admitted. "You're all I have left of my daughter. So I hired a private investigator, found out where you lived, where you worked. I've been coming to that diner for weeks, always sitting in different sections, watching you from a distance, trying to work up the courage to approach you." "The storm," Emma said slowly, understanding dawning. "Tonight wasn't an accident either, was it?" Margaret had the grace to look ashamed. I knew a bad storm was coming. I thought if I appeared in distress, if I needed help, you might. I'm sorry. It was manipulative. I just didn't know any other way to finally talk to you. Emma stood up abruptly, needing space, needing air, needing something to make sense in a world that had just been turned upside down. She walked to the window, staring out at the snow that continued to fall, each flake another layer of confusion and revelation. Gerald Mitchell is technically my father, Emma said flatly. The man who just fired me. The man who's been cruel to me for 2 years. He knew who I was. I don't think he did, Margaret said quickly. You were adopted with a closed adoption. Your name changed. You look like your adoptive mother, not Sarah. I don't think Gerald made the connection. But you did. I've been looking at your face for 23 years, Emma. First in Sarah's features, then in my dreams, then finally in reality. I would know you anywhere. Emma turned back to face Margaret, this woman who claimed to be her grandmother, who had manipulated her way into her life, who had just destroyed every certainty she possessed. The man at the diner, Emma said suddenly. Alexander Thornton. He has your last name. Who is he? Margaret's expression became pained. He's Sarah's brother, your uncle. He's been searching for you too, though he didn't know I had found you. When I saw him in the diner tonight, I realized the universe was bringing us all together. Does he know? About me? Not yet, Margaret admitted. But he will. Alexander he's powerful, Emma. Wealthy in ways you can't imagine. When Sarah died, he blamed Gerald. Tried to destroy him financially, legally, every way he could. But Gerald is clever, and some of his cruelty is careful enough to be legal. Alexander has been waiting for years to find something, anything, to finally make Gerald pay. And I'm that something, Emma said, understanding the shape of what was happening, even if she didn't fully grasp the details yet. You're not a weapon, Margaret said firmly. You're my granddaughter. You're Alexander's niece. Your family. Family we've been searching for. Emma looked at this frail old woman, at the photograph of a mother she never knew, at the business card from an uncle she had just met without knowing their connection. Her life had been hard but simple. Now it was becoming complicated in ways she couldn't begin to navigate. I need time, Emma said finally. This is too much. I need to think. Of course, Margaret said, standing shakily. I should go. I've imposed enough. Sit down, Emma ordered. You're not going anywhere in this storm. You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, when the snow clears and my head is clearer, we'll talk more. But tonight, I just need silence. Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her weathered face. Thank you, Emma, for everything. For your kindness, for listening, for not throwing me out immediately. As Emma prepared the sofa for Margaret to sleep on, taking the bed herself seemed wrong, so she grabbed spare blankets and made a pallet on the floor. She wondered what tomorrow would bring. She had lost her job, discovered her true parentage, and learned that the cruelest boss she had ever worked for was somehow connected to her by blood. But she had also gained a grandmother, an uncle, a connection to a past she never knew existed. As she finally lay down, exhausted beyond measure, Emma's last thought before sleep claimed her was that sometimes a single act of kindness opens doors you never knew existed. She just hoped that what waited on the other side of those doors would be worth the chaos they had unleashed. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the tiny apartment, 2 women connected by blood and circumstance slept fitfully, both dreaming of the revelations tomorrow would bring. Morning arrived with the cruel brightness that only follows snowstorms, the sun reflecting off pristine white surfaces with an intensity that hurt to look at directly. Emma woke to find herself disoriented, her body aching from sleeping on the hard floor, her mind still trying to reconcile the impossible revelations of the previous night with the reality of dawn. For a blissful moment, she thought it had all been a dream. The storm, the diner confrontation, Margaret's devastating confession. But then she heard the soft sound of breathing from the sofa, saw the elderly woman still sleeping peacefully under the spare blankets, and knew that her entire world had indeed been transformed in a single night. Emma stood carefully, trying not to wake Margaret, and moved to the small bathroom. The face that stared back at her from the mirror looked the same as always. Same tired eyes, same worry lines that had appeared too early, same stubborn determination that had carried her through impossible situations. But now she looked at those features differently, searching for traces of Sarah Mitchell, the mother she never knew, in the shape of her nose or the curve of her jaw. By the time Margaret woke, Emma had prepared a simple breakfast with the meager supplies in her apartment: toast with margarine, instant coffee that tasted like regret, and the last 2 eggs she had been saving for Nathan's breakfast later in the week. "You didn't have to do this," Margaret said, her voice still rough from sleep. In the morning light, she looked even more fragile than she had the night before, but there was also something stronger in her expression. Relief, perhaps, that her secret was finally spoken aloud. "We need to talk," Emma said, setting the plates down on the small table. "Really talk. I need to know everything. Need to..." For the next hour, Margaret painted a picture of Emma's origins that was both heartbreaking and infuriating. She spoke of Sarah as a bright, compassionate young woman who had fallen for Gerald's charm before seeing the cruelty that lurked beneath. She described the joy of Emma's birth, followed quickly by the devastation of Gerald's rejection. "Sarah tried everything," Margaret said, her hands wrapped around the coffee mug as if drawing warmth from it. She begged Gerald to reconsider, promised she would work to help support the family, suggested counseling, but he was immovable. He said daughters were worthless, that he needed a son to carry on his legacy. His name. "What legacy?" Emma asked bitterly. "He owns a failing diner and treats people terribly. What exactly was he planning to pass on?" "Gerald came from old money," Margaret explained. "His family had been wealthy for generations, but by the time he inherited, most of it was gone, squandered by his father's gambling and his mother's spending. The diner was his attempt to rebuild, to prove he could be successful on his own. But he's never been able to accept that he's just ordinary, that his last name doesn't make him special anymore." Emma absorbed this information, adding another layer to her understanding of the man who had fired her. Gerald's cruelty suddenly made a different kind of sense, the rage of someone who believed the world owed them something and was perpetually disappointed. "And Alexander?" Emma asked. "My uncle. Tell me about him." Margaret's expression softened with obvious affection. "Alexander is 2 years older than Sarah was. He adored his little sister. When your parents died in a plane crash, Alexander and Sarah's parents, I mean, he was 20 and she was 18. He took care of her, made sure she could finish college, tried to guide her away from Gerald, though she didn't listen. When Sarah died, Alexander blamed himself for not protecting her better. He threw himself into building his company, becoming successful in a way that Gerald never could. I think part of it was wanting to prove that their family name still meant something, that Sarah's memory deserved to be honored with achievement rather than pettiness." Before Emma could ask more questions, her phone rang, an unfamiliar number with a local area code. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Miss Parker?" The voice was cultured, precise, unmistakable. "Alexander Thornton. I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to follow up on our brief meeting last night." Emma's heart rate accelerated. She looked at Margaret, who had gone very still, clearly able to hear enough of the conversation to know who was calling. "Mr. Thornton," Emma said carefully, "this is unexpected." "I imagine many things have been unexpected for you recently," Alexander replied, and there was something in his tone that made Emma wonder exactly how much he knew. "I'd like to meet with you this morning, if you're available, to discuss the job opportunity I mentioned and other matters that may be relevant to your future." "Other matters?" "I think it would be better to discuss in person. My office is in the Sterling Tower downtown. I can send a car for you. The roads are still difficult after the storm." Emma looked around her tiny apartment, at Margaret watching her with obvious anxiety, at the photograph of Sarah holding her infant self that now sat on the coffee table like evidence of a life she never knew she had. "I'll be there," Emma heard herself say, "but I have someone with me, someone you should meet." There was a pause on the other end of the line, heavy with unspoken questions. "Bring whomever you need." "Shall we say 10 o'clock? After Emma hung up, Margaret's face had gone pale. "You're going to tell him about me. About everything. Don't you think he deserves to know?" Emma asked. "You said he's been searching for me too, that he loved Sarah. How can I keep this secret from him?" "You're right," Margaret said, though her hands trembled as she set down her coffee cup. "It's just, Alexander and I haven't spoken in years. After Sarah died, we had a terrible argument about how to handle Gerald, about whether to keep looking for you. He wanted to wage war. I wanted to respect the adoption, let you live in peace. We both said things we regretted. Then maybe it's time to repair that too," Emma said with a determination that surprised herself. In less than 24 hours, she had lost her job, discovered a secret family, and apparently decided to wade into decades-old conflicts that had nothing to do with her except that they had everything to do with who she was. The car Alexander sent was exactly what Emma expected from a man of his obvious wealth. Sleek, expensive, with a driver who treated them with impeccable courtesy, as if chauffeuring a broke waitress and an elderly homeless woman were the most natural thing in the world. Emma watched the city pass by the tinted windows, seeing familiar streets transformed by snow into something almost beautiful. Sterling Tower was a monument to modern architecture and excessive wealth, all glass and steel, soaring into the sky with the confidence of something that had never doubted its right to exist. The lobby alone was larger than Emma's entire apartment building, with marble floors that echoed with every step and art installations that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. They were escorted to a private elevator that required a key card to access the top floors. As they ascended, Emma watched Margaret's reflection in the mirrored walls. The elderly woman looked terrified, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "It'll be okay," Emma said softly, taking Margaret's hand. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." The elevator doors opened directly into a reception area that was all understated elegance. A professional woman at the desk looked up with a practiced smile that only flickered slightly when she saw their modest appearances. "Miss Parker and guest for Mr. Thornton," the receptionist said into her headset. "Yes, sir, right away." She looked up at them. "He'll see you immediately, through those doors." Alexander Thornton's office was less ostentatious than Emma had expected. Yes, there were the requisite signs of wealth, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view that captured the entire city, furniture that whispered rather than shouted its cost, technology integrated so seamlessly it was almost invisible. But there were also books everywhere, personal photographs, and an overall sense that this was a space where actual work happened, not just a showpiece for intimidating visitors. Alexander stood from behind his desk as they entered, and Emma got her first real look at the man who was apparently her uncle. He was probably in his mid-40s, with the kind of presence that came from genuine confidence rather than bluster. His features were refined but approachable, and his eyes, when they fixed on Emma, held an intensity that made her breath catch. But when those same eyes shifted to Margaret, everything changed. Emma watched shock, anger, disbelief, and something that might have been desperate hope flicker across his face in rapid succession. "Mother," Alexander said, and his voice cracked on the single word in a way that spoke of years of suppressed emotion. "Hello, Alexander," Margaret said quietly, tears already streaming down her weathered face. "I've missed you so much." Emma looked between them, confused. "Mother? But you said, I thought you were Sarah's mother." "I am," Margaret said, not taking her eyes off Alexander. "And I'm also Alexander's mother. I'm sorry for the confusion. Sarah and Alexander, they're my children." The revelation hung in the air as Alexander and Margaret stared at each other across the expanse of expensive carpet. Years of separation, anger, and unresolved grief filled the space between them. "You look terrible," Alexander finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "Where have you been?" "I've had investigators searching for months." "Surviving," Margaret replied simply. "After our argument, after you said those things about respecting Sarah's choices by forgetting her daughter ever existed, I couldn't stay in that house, couldn't keep living off your charity while knowing you had given up the search." "I never gave up," Alexander said fiercely, moving toward her. "I lied to you because I thought if you believed I had stopped looking, you would stop torturing yourself with false hope. But I've had 3 different agencies searching for Emma for years." He turned to Emma, and she saw tears in his eyes. "When I saw you in that diner last night, something about you seemed familiar. The way you moved, the expression on your face when you defied that awful man. You reminded me of Sarah so much it hurt. But I convinced myself it was just wishful thinking, that I was seeing her in every kind young woman I encountered. But it was her," Margaret said, moving to stand beside Emma. "Alexander, this is Emma Parker, your niece, Sarah's daughter." The silence that followed was absolute. Emma watched her uncle's face transform as he truly looked at her. As recognition dawned, an impossible hope became concrete reality. "Sarah's daughter," he whispered, "all this time, working in that monster's diner, living in poverty while I—" He couldn't finish the sentence, overcome by emotion. "You didn't know," Emma said, finding her voice despite the surrealness of the situation. "No one knew. The adoption was closed. But I should have found you," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "I have unlimited resources. I should have looked harder, done more." "You found me eventually," Emma pointed out. "Or rather, I found you. Margaret found me. However it happened, we're here now." Alexander moved suddenly, pulling Emma into an embrace that caught her completely off guard. He held her tightly, and she could feel him trembling with suppressed sobs. When he finally pulled back, his face was wet with tears he made no attempt to hide. "You look so much like her," he said wonderingly, touching Emma's face with gentle fingers, as if confirming she was real. "Your eyes." Sarah had those same eyes, determined, kind, seeing the best in people even when they didn't deserve it. "Tell me about her," Emma asked. "Please." "Margaret told me some things, but I need to know more. I need to understand who she was." For the next hour, Alexander painted a picture of Sarah Mitchell that made Emma's heart ache for the mother she never knew. He described a woman who volunteered at homeless shelters, who befriended lonely elderly neighbors, who once spent her entire paycheck buying coats for children who didn't have winter clothes. He showed Emma photographs, Sarah laughing, Sarah serious, Sarah holding a diploma, Sarah on her wedding day looking radiantly happy before she understood what she had married into. "She would be so proud of you," Alexander said, looking at a photograph of Emma from the diner security cameras that his assistant had apparently pulled. "Working multiple jobs to support your brother, sacrificing your own education for family, standing up to Gerald even when it cost you everything. That's exactly who Sarah was." "Gerald?" Emma said, and suddenly she felt anger rising to replace the sadness. "He knew. Last night when he fired me, he knew who I was. I looked at him and introduced myself with my full name when I started working there." "Parker was your adoptive family's name," Margaret said quickly. "Not Mitchell. He wouldn't have connected you." "But my face," Emma insisted. "You said I look like Sarah. He was married to her. How could he not see it?" Alexander's expression darkened. "Because Gerald never really looked at Sarah. She was a possession to him, not a person. I doubt he could describe her face accurately even now. He saw what he wanted to see. Beauty he could display. Status he could claim. He never actually saw her." "We need to tell him," Emma said suddenly. "We need Gerald to know exactly who I am and what he did." "Emma," Margaret began, but Alexander interrupted. "She's right." His voice had changed, becoming harder, more focused. "Gerald has escaped consequences for too long. He drove my sister to her death with his cruelty. He forced her to give up her child. And then he had the audacity to treat that same child, his own daughter by blood if not by acceptance, as if she were worthless. What are you proposing?" Margaret asked warily. Alexander walked to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. "For years, I've been gathering evidence of Gerald's business practices. The health code violations he bribes inspectors to overlook. The wages he's stolen from employees through illegal schedule manipulation. The discrimination lawsuits he settled quietly. The tax evasion. I've been waiting for the right moment to destroy him financially and legally." He looked at Emma with an expression that was both gentle and fierce. "But I've been missing one thing, the moral authority to act. Gerald could always claim I was just a vindictive brother-in-law, that my attacks were personal vendettas without merit. But you, Emma, you're his daughter. You have every right to demand accountability. And when the world learns that he's been treating his own child like garbage while she struggled in poverty, the court of public opinion will be even harsher than any legal judgment." Emma felt the weight of what Alexander was proposing. He wasn't just suggesting they reveal the truth to Gerald privately. He was suggesting they expose him publicly, use her story as part of a larger campaign to bring him down completely. "I don't want revenge," Emma said slowly. "I want justice. I want him to face real consequences, not just for what he did to me, but for everyone he's hurt." "Then let me help you get it," Alexander said. I have resources you can't imagine. Legal teams, investigators, connections in media and government. Together, we can make sure Gerald Mitchell faces every consequence he's earned. And what do I have to do? Tell your story, Alexander said simply. Tell the world what happened to you. Let people see the human cost of Gerald's cruelty. The rest, the legal proceedings, the business consequences, I'll handle. Emma looked at Margaret, who was watching her with an expression that mixed concern and hope. What do you think? I think, Margaret said carefully, that Sarah would want you to fight. She couldn't fight Gerald when she was alive. She was trapped by circumstances and fear. But you're stronger than she ever got the chance to be. You have resources she never had. If you want to do this, I'll support you. Emma turned back to Alexander. I want one thing first. Name it. I want to confront Gerald face to face. I want him to know who I am before the world does. He deserves that much. Not as a kindness, but so he fully understands what he's about to lose and why. Alexander smiled, and there was something predatory in it. I can arrange that. In fact, I have a business meeting scheduled with Gerald tomorrow morning. Something about a potential investment opportunity that he's desperately hoping will save his failing diner. How would you like to attend as my associate? The plan was audacious, possibly foolish, but Emma felt certainty settling in her bones. She had spent her whole life being invisible, being underestimated, being dismissed. It was time to be seen. I'll be there, she said firmly. As they discussed logistics and strategies, Emma felt something shifting inside her. She was still the same person who had served coffee yesterday, still had the same student debt and the same little brother to support. But she was also Sarah Mitchell's daughter, Alexander Thornton's niece, Margaret's granddaughter. She was part of a family that had been searching for her, and she was done being treated as if she didn't matter. When they finally left Alexander's office, the sun was high in the sky, the snow already beginning to melt under its warmth. Emma looked at the city with new eyes. Somewhere out there, Gerald Mitchell was going about his day, completely unaware that his past was about to collide with his present in the most devastating way possible. Tomorrow would change everything. But today, for the first time in her life, Emma Parker felt like she had a family that actually wanted her, and that was worth fighting for. The morning of the meeting arrived with a sense of inevitability, like a storm everyone could see approaching, but no one could prevent. Emma woke before dawn, her stomach churning with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Today she would face Gerald Mitchell, not as a powerless waitress he could dismiss with casual cruelty, but as something he had never expected to encounter. His own abandoned daughter, backed by resources and allies he couldn't intimidate or ignore. Alexander had sent professional attire to the apartment the previous evening, a suit that fit perfectly despite him having never taken her measurements, in a deep navy that conveyed authority without ostentation. Emma stared at herself in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the professional woman reflected back. She looked capable, confident, like someone who belonged in boardrooms and corner offices. But inside, she still felt like the scared waitress who had lost her job for showing basic human decency. "You look beautiful," Margaret said from the doorway, her voice thick with emotion, so much like Sarah. She wore that same expression before difficult conversations, determined but scared, brave but vulnerable. "I don't know if I can do this," Emma admitted, her hands trembling as she tried to fix her hair into something resembling a professional style. "What if I freeze? What if I can't find the words?" "Then I'll speak for you." Alexander's voice came from the living room, where he had arrived early to ensure Emma didn't face this alone. "But I don't think you'll need me. You've already proven you're stronger than Gerald in every way that matters." The drive to Miller's Diner felt surreal. Emma watched familiar streets pass by from the back of Alexander's luxury car, seeing her world from a completely different vantage point. How many times had she walked these same blocks in worn shoes, carrying groceries she could barely afford, invisible to the people in cars like this one? Now she was on the other side of that glass, but she hadn't forgotten what it felt like to be unseen. Gerald had closed the diner for this meeting, a sign of how desperately he needed whatever investment opportunity Alexander was dangling. The parking lot was empty, except for Gerald's aging sedan and a catering truck that suggested he had gone to significant expense to impress his potential investor. "Last chance to back out," Alexander said, his hand on the door handle. "We can turn around right now. You owe Gerald Mitchell nothing. I owe myself this, Emma replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. And I owe it to Sarah. She couldn't stand up to him, but I can. The diner looked different in morning light, empty of customers and the usual chaos of breakfast rush. Gerald had set up the back room for the meeting, a space Emma had only glimpsed while taking out trash, now transformed with a borrowed conference table and chairs that didn't match. He had clearly tried to make the space impressive, but it only emphasized the shabbiness of everything around it. Gerald stood when they entered, his expression shifting rapidly through surprise, confusion, and carefully constructed charm. He had dressed in what Emma recognized as his important occasion suit, slightly too tight and shiny with wear at the elbows. Mr. Thornton, Gerald extended his hand with practiced enthusiasm. Thank you so much for considering my proposal. I think you'll see that Miller's Diner represents an incredible opportunity for... He stopped mid-sentence as Emma stepped out from behind Alexander. She watched the recognition flash across his face. Not recognition of who she really was, but recognition that his former employee had somehow ended up accompanying the millionaire investor he was trying to impress. Emma? Gerald's voice was sharp with confusion and barely suppressed anger. What are you doing here? I fired you. You have no business. Emma is here as my associate, Alexander interrupted smoothly, his tone carrying an edge that made Gerald's mouth snap shut. She's been instrumental in my preliminary research into your establishment. Please, shall we sit? The power dynamics in the room were immediately clear. Gerald was off balance, trying to reconcile his dismissal of Emma as worthless with her apparent connection to the man whose money he desperately needed. Emma watched him struggle with this cognitive dissonance, saw the calculations happening behind his eyes as he tried to determine how to handle the situation. They settled into chairs that creaked under their weight. Alexander pulled out a leather portfolio with theatrical precision, letting the silence stretch until Gerald began to fidget. Mr. Mitchell, Alexander began, I've spent considerable time researching Miller's Diner. The financial records you provided were illuminating. Though I must say, there are some discrepancies between your official reports and what my investigators uncovered. Gerald paled slightly but maintained his composure. I assure you, Mr. Thornton, everything is perfectly legitimate. If there are questions about the accounting, I'm sure my bookkeeper can... Let's not waste time with lies, Alexander cut him off, his voice dropping to something colder. We both know your books are creatively maintained at best, fraudulent at worst. The health code violations, the wage theft, the discrimination complaints you've settled quietly, I have documentation of all of it. I don't know what you're talking about, Gerald blustered, but sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. If someone has been spreading lies about my business, I'm not here to invest in your diner, Alexander continued as if Gerald hadn't spoken. I'm here for something else entirely, something that happened years ago, something involving your wife, Sarah. The name landed like a physical blow. Gerald's face went white, then red, emotions flickering too rapidly to track. Sarah is dead, he said flatly. I don't see what my late wife has to do with a business meeting. Everything. Emma spoke for the first time, her voice stronger than she expected. She has everything to do with this. Gerald's eyes fixed on her with an intensity that would have terrified her 2 days ago. Listen, girl, I don't know what kind of game you and this... My name is Emma Parker, she interrupted, standing up for emphasis. But you knew me by a different name once, very briefly, before you decided I wasn't worth keeping. She watched confusion creep across Gerald's face, watched him try to make sense of her words. Then Alexander placed a photograph on the table. The same image Margaret had shown Emma days ago. Sarah holding her infant daughter with radiant joy and devastating love. That's Sarah holding her daughter, Alexander said quietly. Your daughter, Gerald. The baby girl you rejected because you wanted a son. Recognition dawned slowly, then all at once. Gerald looked between the photograph and Emma's face, seeing for the first time the resemblance he had never noticed before. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly. That's impossible, he finally whispered. The adoption was closed. She went to a family in another state. There's no way you could... Yet here I am, Emma said, leaning forward on the table. The worthless daughter you threw away. The baby you told Sarah meant nothing to you. I've been working in your diner for 2 years, serving your coffee, cleaning your floors, taking your abuse. And you never once recognized your own child. The silence that followed was absolute. Gerald seemed to be struggling to process information that contradicted everything he had convinced himself was true. Emma could see him trying to find an angle, a way to turn this situation to his advantage, or at least minimize the damage. If this is some kind of blackmail scheme, Gerald started, but his voice lacked conviction. Blackmail? Emma laughed, and there was no humor in it. What exactly would I be blackmailing you for? You have nothing I want. You are nothing I want. I just wanted you to know, before the world finds out, exactly what kind of man you are. The world? Gerald's voice rose with panic. What are you talking about? Alexander pulled out another folder, this one substantially thicker. Tomorrow morning, several major news outlets will be running stories about Miller's Diner and its owner. They'll detail the labor violations, the health code issues, the systematic abuse of vulnerable employees. But the centerpiece will be Emma's story. How you rejected your own daughter at birth, how she ended up working for you years later without your recognition, and how you fired her for the crime of showing compassion to a stranger. You can't do this. Gerald stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'll sue. I'll fight you. You can't destroy my business based on lies from some girl claiming to be DNA test, Emma said calmly, pulling out a document. Alexander arranged it yesterday. 99.9% probability that we're biological father and daughter. It's not a claim, Gerald. It's a fact. She watched this information land, watched Gerald's face cycle through denial, anger, bargaining, and finally a desperate kind of calculation. His business instincts were kicking in, trying to find a way to spin this, to minimize the damage. Okay, he said, holding up his hands in a gesture of surrender that Emma didn't believe for a second. Okay, let's say this is all true. Let's say you are. That's Sarah and I. Look, it was a long time ago. I was young, stupid. I made mistakes, but surely we can work something out. Father and daughter reunited. That's a heartwarming story, right? We could use this. Partner in the diner, maybe. Show the world that I've changed, that... Stop. Emma's voice cracked like a whip. Just stop. You don't get to rewrite this story. You don't get to turn your cruelty into a redemption narrative. You didn't make a mistake, Gerald. You made a choice. You chose your pride over your daughter. You chose cruelty over compassion. And even when I was right in front of you, even when I was working in your diner, you chose to treat me like garbage. I didn't know it was you, Gerald shouted, desperation finally breaking through his composure. How was I supposed to know? The adoption was closed. You had a different name. That's exactly the point, Emma said, and she felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. You treated me terribly not because of who I was, but because of what I was. Someone you perceived as beneath you. A waitress, a poor girl struggling to survive, someone without power or status. And that's who you really are, Gerald. Not a man who made a mistake with one baby. A man who treats every vulnerable person like they're disposable. Margaret, who had been silent until now, stood up. She had been sitting in the corner, and Gerald clearly hadn't recognized her initially. But now, as she moved into the light, Emma saw the moment recognition hit him. Margaret, Gerald breathed, his face going even paler. You're alive. I heard you were homeless? Margaret finished for him. Yes, I was. After Sarah died, after you blocked every attempt I made to find my granddaughter, after Alexander and I had our falling out, I had nothing. No money. You made sure Sarah's life insurance went to you instead of her family. No home. I couldn't bear to live in the house where she'd been so unhappy. So yes, Gerald, I ended up on the streets. That's not my fault, Gerald said, but his voice wavered. You had options. You could have. I was the woman in the diner that night, Margaret continued as if he hadn't spoken. The homeless woman you tried to throw out into a blizzard. Your own mother-in-law, and you didn't even recognize me. Just like you didn't recognize your own daughter, because you never really looked at any of us, did you? We were all just inconveniences to you. Gerald collapsed back into his chair, the fight draining out of him as the full weight of his situation became clear. He wasn't just facing a business scandal. He was facing the complete destruction of any reputation he had left. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice defeated. "Money? I don't have much, but whatever I have—" "We don't want your money," Alexander said with barely concealed disgust. "We want accountability. Tomorrow the stories will run. The health department will launch a formal investigation. The labor board will audit your employment practices. Your business will likely fail, as it should have years ago if you hadn't been bribing inspectors." "But," Emma added, and Gerald's head snapped up with desperate hope, "there's one thing you can do that might salvage a tiny shred of dignity." "Anything," Gerald said quickly. "Tell the truth," Emma said simply. "When the reporters come, don't lie. Don't make excuses. Don't try to spin this into something it isn't. Admit what you did. Admit that you rejected your daughter because she wasn't a son. Admit that you've built your business by exploiting people who had no choice but to work for you. Admit that you're the kind of man who would throw a homeless woman into a snowstorm without a second thought." "If I do that, I'm finished," Gerald said flatly. "You're finished anyway," Alexander pointed out. "But if you tell the truth, at least you'll be finished with some small measure of honesty. It won't redeem you. It won't make up for what you've done. But it might show that you're capable of acknowledging reality." Gerald sat in silence for a long moment, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Emma watched him struggle with the choice, cling to denial and lies, or face the truth of what he had become. She found that she didn't actually hate him, which surprised her. What she felt was closer to pity, mixed with disappointment. He was a small man who had tried to make himself feel big by making others feel small, and now he was facing the consequences of that choice. "I need time," Gerald finally said, "to process this, to figure out—" "You have until tomorrow morning," Alexander said, standing up. "The stories will run with or without your cooperation, but if you're willing to be honest, I'll make sure your voice is included. That's more than you deserve," but Emma insisted. As they moved toward the door, Gerald's voice stopped them. "Emma!" She turned to look at him. This man who was her father by biology, but had never been a parent in any way that mattered. "I'm sorry," Gerald said, and for the first time he sounded genuine. "I know it doesn't matter. I know it doesn't change anything. But I am sorry. Sarah deserved better. You deserved better. And I was too stupid and proud to see what I was throwing away." Emma looked at him for a long moment. This broken man sitting alone in his shabby diner, about to lose everything he had spent years building. She thought about saying something cruel, about twisting the knife, about making him feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused. But she found she didn't have it in her. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "But you're right. It doesn't change anything. The damage is done. All we can do now is try to make sure you can't damage anyone else." As they walked out into the bright morning sunshine, Emma felt a strange mixture of emotions. Not triumph exactly, though there was satisfaction in finally being heard, finally being seen. Not happiness, because the situation was too complex and painful for simple happiness. But there was something like peace, the peace of knowing that she had stood up for herself, for Sarah, for everyone Gerald had ever hurt. "How do you feel?" Alexander asked as they reached the car. Emma considered the question carefully. "Like I just closed a door I didn't even know was open. Like I can finally stop wondering about the man who gave me life and focus on the people who actually want to be my family." Margaret took Emma's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Sarah would be so proud of you," she said through tears. "So incredibly proud." As they drove away from Miller's diner, Emma allowed herself one look back. Gerald was standing in the window watching them leave, his silhouette small and defeated against the glass. Emma felt no joy in his downfall, but she felt no guilt either. Some people had to face consequences, and Gerald Mitchell's consequences had finally arrived. Tomorrow, the world would know the truth. But today, Emma Parker had taken back her power from the man who had tried to convince her she had none, and that was enough. The morning the articles went live, Emma woke to the sound of her phone vibrating continuously with notifications. She had silenced the ringer the night before, anticipating this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the sheer volume of response. Messages, emails, social media mentions. Her story was everywhere. Alexander had been strategic about the release, coordinating with 3 major news outlets simultaneously so Gerald couldn't suppress or spin the narrative. The headlines were damning. Millionaire exposes diner owner's decades of abuse. Homeless grandmother and lost granddaughter reunite to take down cruel businessman. Waitress fired for kindness discovers she's the daughter her boss abandoned. But it was the human interest pieces that really resonated. Journalists had interviewed former employees of Miller's Diner, each with their own story of Gerald's cruelty. They had documented the health code violations, the wage theft, the systematic exploitation of vulnerable workers. Emma's story wasn't unique. It was simply the most dramatic example of a pattern that had destroyed countless lives. Margaret sat on the sofa, reading through articles on a tablet Alexander had provided, tears streaming down her weathered face. "They're listening," she kept saying. Finally, someone is listening. Emma moved to the small kitchen to make coffee, needing something normal and routine in a morning that felt surreal. Through the window, she could see news vans gathering on the street below. Word had gotten out about where she lived, and reporters were hoping for an interview, a photo, a statement. "They'll leave you alone if you want," Alexander said from the doorway. He had spent the night in a hotel nearby, determined to be present for whatever came next. "I have security people who can keep them away." "No," Emma said, surprising herself. "I should talk to them. My story isn't just about me anymore. It's about everyone Gerald hurt. If I stay silent, I'm making it about me again. But if I speak, I can amplify all those other voices." Alexander smiled with obvious pride. Sarah would have said exactly the same thing. Before Emma could respond, there was a knock at the door. 3 quick raps that she recognized instantly. Her heart leaped with joy mixed with anxiety. She had texted Nathan last night, giving him the briefest explanation possible, but seeing him in person after everything that had happened felt monumental. She opened the door to find her 15-year-old brother standing in the hallway, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his expression mixing concern and curiosity. Nathan was tall for his age, lanky in the way of teenagers who hadn't quite grown into their frames, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Your text said we needed to talk," Nathan said, walking into the apartment. "But you didn't mention the news vans downstairs or the fact that your face is literally on every news site I checked this morning." He stopped when he saw Margaret and Alexander, his posture immediately becoming defensive. "Who are they?" Emma closed the door and took a deep breath. "Sit down, Nathan. There's a lot I need to tell you." For the next hour, Emma explained everything. Her adoption, her biological parents, the confrontation with Gerald, the decision to go public. Nathan listened without interrupting, his expressions cycling through shock, anger, confusion, and finally something that might have been understanding. "So the guy who's been treating you like garbage at that diner," Nathan said slowly, "is technically your biological father. And you knew this when you went to confront him?" "Yes. And these people," he gestured toward Margaret and Alexander, "are your biological grandmother and uncle, which I guess makes them my—" "What exactly?" "Family," Margaret said firmly, standing up and moving toward Nathan with surprising energy for someone who had been homeless days before. "If you'll have us, Emma may be my granddaughter by blood, but you're her brother in every way that matters. That makes you family to us too." Nathan looked at Margaret warily, then at Alexander, who had remained seated, clearly understanding that the teenage boy needed space to process. "You're the millionaire guy from the articles." "Guilty," Alexander said with a slight smile, "though I prefer uncle who wants to help." "Help how?" Nathan's tone was skeptical, and Emma felt a surge of pride at his caution. She had raised him to question offers that seemed too good to be true. "However you need," Alexander replied simply. "Educational opportunities, mentorship, resources to develop your engineering talents. Emma tells me you're brilliant with electronics." Nathan shot Emma a look. "You told him about my projects?" "She's proud of you," Margaret interjected. "She's been sacrificing everything to give you opportunities. Now it's our turn to help." Before Nathan could respond, Emma's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Miss Parker, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I'm standing outside your building with several other journalists. We'd like to offer you an opportunity to tell your story in your own words. Live on our morning show. Would you be willing?" "Yes," Emma heard herself say. "Give me 30 minutes to get ready. I'll come down." After she hung up, Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? We can arrange something more controlled, in a studio, with preparation time." "No," Emma said firmly. "If I'm going to do this, I'm doing it honestly. Live, unrehearsed, from my actual apartment building. I want people to see the reality of the situation, not some polished version." Margaret squeezed her hand. "I'll be right there with you if you want." "Me too," Nathan added, and Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion at his immediate loyalty. 20 minutes later, Emma stood on the sidewalk in front of her apartment building, surrounded by cameras and journalists, with Margaret on one side and Nathan on the other. Alexander stood slightly behind, a quiet presence of support. Jennifer Walsh, an experienced reporter with kind eyes, positioned herself for the interview. "We're live in 3, 2, 1. Good morning. I'm standing with Emma Parker, the young woman whose story has captivated the nation today. Emma, thank you for agreeing to speak with us. I imagine this has been an overwhelming experience." Emma took a deep breath, focusing on the camera, knowing that behind that lens were millions of people who might be inspired or moved or changed by what she said next. "It has been overwhelming," Emma admitted. "But not for the reasons people might think. I'm not overwhelmed by the attention. I'm overwhelmed by how many people have shared their own stories of being mistreated by employers, of struggling to survive, of being made to feel worthless because of circumstances beyond their control. You were working at Miller's Diner, owned by Gerald Mitchell, who we now know is your biological father. Did you know this when you took the job?" "No," Emma said firmly. "I had no idea. I was adopted as an infant, and the adoption was closed. I grew up in a loving family." She gestured to Nathan. "With my brother Nathan and our late mother. I took the job at Miller's Diner because I needed money to support us after our mother died. That's it. No ulterior motives, no revenge plot. Just a girl trying to survive." "But Gerald Mitchell didn't recognize you during the 2 years you worked there. He never really looked at me," Emma said, and she felt the truth of those words resonate. "Not just me. He didn't really see any of his employees as human beings. We were just labor to him, interchangeable and disposable. That's why my story matters, because I'm not special. I'm just the one who happened to have resources to fight back." Margaret spoke up then, her voice stronger than Emma had ever heard it. "My daughter Sarah, Emma's biological mother, was a kind, compassionate woman who died believing she had failed her child. But she didn't fail. She made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. And Emma has grown into exactly the person Sarah hoped she would be. Someone who stands up for others, who shows compassion even when it costs her everything." "And now?" Jennifer Walsh asked. "What happens next for you, Emma?" Emma glanced at Alexander, who nodded encouragingly. "Now I use the platform this story has given me to advocate for workers' rights, for adoption reform, for better protections for vulnerable employees. My uncle," she gestured to Alexander, "has offered to fund a foundation focused on these issues. We're calling it the Sarah Mitchell Foundation, in honor of my biological mother." "That's not all," Alexander stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. "I'm also pleased to announce that, effective immediately, I'm offering full college scholarships to any current or former employee of Miller's Diner who wishes to pursue higher education. And Emma will be joining Thornton Enterprises as Director of Human Dignity Initiatives, leading our corporate responsibility programs." The reporters erupted with questions, but Emma raised her hand for silence. "There's one more thing I want to say. This story isn't really about me, or Gerald Mitchell, or even my biological family. It's about how we treat each other. It's about seeing the humanity in every person we encounter, regardless of their job title or bank account balance." She looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, and you're struggling, if you're working minimum wage while people treat you as if you're worthless, if you've been told you don't matter, I want you to know that you do matter. Your dignity is inherent. It can't be taken away by cruel bosses or difficult circumstances. And there are people who will stand with you, who will fight for you, if you have the courage to ask for help." Nathan squeezed her hand, and Emma felt tears threatening. "My brother Nathan here is one of the smartest people I know. He builds computers from scraps, teaches himself engineering from library books, and has never let poverty define his dreams. That's the real story, not me confronting my biological father, but all the Nathans out there who deserve opportunities to develop their incredible talents. The interview continued for several more minutes, but Emma had said what she needed to say. As the cameras finally turned off and the reporters dispersed to file their stories, she felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "You did great," Alexander said, pulling her into a hug. Sarah would be so proud. Over the following weeks, Emma watched as her story rippled out in ways she never anticipated. The health department shut down Miller's Diner pending a full investigation. Gerald Mitchell faced multiple lawsuits from former employees and criminal charges for wage theft and tax evasion. But more importantly, 3 other businesses in the city were also investigated after employees found the courage to come forward with their own stories of abuse. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation officially launched with a gala event that raised millions for workers' rights organizations. Nathan, initially uncomfortable with the attention and wealth, found his footing when Alexander connected him with engineering mentors and resources to develop his projects. Margaret moved into a comfortable apartment, not luxurious, but warm and safe, with room for Emma and Nathan to visit regularly. But the moment that meant the most to Emma came several months later, at an event she had organized for former Miller's Diner employees. 30 people gathered in a community center, sharing their stories, connecting with resources, and supporting each other's healing. A young woman named Sophia approached Emma hesitantly. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her accent revealing recent immigration. "I was working at Miller's Diner on a visa, and Gerald threatened to report me if I complained about not being paid. I was terrified. But when your story came out, when I saw you standing up to him, I found the courage to speak to a lawyer. Now I have a legal case, and I'm working at a place that treats me with respect." Emma hugged her tightly. "You did the hard part. You found your courage. I just opened a door. Sometimes that's all people need," Sophia replied. "Someone to show them the door exists." That evening, Emma sat in Margaret's apartment, their grandmother's apartment, as Nathan now called it, surrounded by family. Nathan was showing Alexander his latest engineering project. Margaret was making her famous soup, filling the space with warmth and the smell of home. Photographs of Sarah covered the walls now, ensuring her memory lived on. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked Emma during a quiet moment. "Going public? Starting all this? Your life was simpler before." Emma considered the question carefully. "Simpler, maybe, but not better. I was surviving before. Now I'm living. There's a difference." She looked around at her family, biological and chosen, connected by blood and by choice, and felt a contentment she had never experienced before. Yes, the journey had been painful. Yes, confronting Gerald had been difficult. Yes, her life had been turned completely upside down. But she had also found her grandmother, her uncle, her heritage. She had turned her pain into purpose, her suffering into advocacy. She had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her, being abandoned by her biological father, and transformed it into the best thing, discovering who she truly was and what she was capable of. "Emma," Margaret called from the kitchen. "Come here. I want to show you something." Emma joined her grandmother, who was holding a small, worn journal. "This was Sarah's diary from the year you were born. I thought you might want to read it now that you're ready." Emma took the journal with trembling hands, opening to a random page. Her mother's handwriting was neat and precise. "Today I held my baby girl for the first time. Emma. Her name is Emma, though the adoptive family will choose their own name for her. She's perfect. Absolutely perfect. Gerald says she's worthless because she's not a son, but he's wrong. She's worth everything. I can see it in her eyes. She's going to be strong, stronger than I ever was. She's going to change the world. I just wish I could be there to see it." Emma felt tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of connection, of understanding, of finally knowing that she had been loved by the mother she never knew. "She was right," Alexander said softly, reading over Emma's shoulder. "You did change the world. Maybe not the whole world yet, but you changed it for the people who needed it most." That night, as Emma stood at Margaret's window looking out over the city, she thought about the snowstorm that had started everything, how a single decision to show kindness to a stranger had unraveled secrets spanning decades and set in motion events that transformed multiple lives. She thought about Gerald, alone in his closed diner, facing consequences he had spent years avoiding. She didn't hate him anymore. What she felt was closer to pity. He had thrown away so much in his pursuit of pride and status. He had missed the chance to know his daughter, to be part of something meaningful, to build something that mattered. But his loss had been her gain. She had found a family who wanted her, work that fulfilled her, and a purpose that transcended her own circumstances. She had taken the cruelty directed at her and transformed it into compassion directed outward. Nathan joined her at the window. "Hey, I got accepted to the summer engineering program at the university. Alexander pulled some strings, but they said I still had to qualify on merit. And I did." Emma pulled her brother into a fierce hug. "Of course you did. You're brilliant." "So are you," Nathan replied. "You know that, right? You're the most brilliant person I know, and it has nothing to do with languages or degrees or any of that. You see people. Really see them. That's a gift." As the city lights twinkled in the darkness, Emma realized that Nathan was right. Her real talent had never been surviving poverty or enduring hardship. It had been maintaining her humanity through all of it, refusing to let circumstances harden her heart, choosing compassion even when it cost her everything. Gerald Mitchell had tried to teach her that kindness was weakness, that vulnerability was failure, that only the ruthless survived. But Emma had proven him wrong. Kindness had been her strength. Vulnerability had connected her to others. And compassion, messy, costly, inconvenient compassion, had ultimately saved her. She had sheltered an old woman in a snowstorm, never imagining that simple act of mercy would reveal her past, reunite her with family, and give her the tools to build a future beyond anything she had dreamed possible. Sometimes, Emma reflected, the smallest acts of kindness create the largest ripples of change. Sometimes showing compassion to one person opens doors you never knew existed. Sometimes the universe rewards decency in ways you could never predict. But mostly, Emma had learned that family isn't just who shares your blood. It's who shows up in storms, who stands beside you in battles, who sees you when you're invisible to everyone else, and who helps you become the person you were always meant to be. And as Emma stood surrounded by the family she had found and the brother she had always had, she knew with certainty that every hardship, every struggle, every moment of doubt had been worth it to arrive at this moment of absolute belonging. The snowstorm had ended weeks ago, but its effects would last a lifetime, and Emma Parker, daughter, sister, advocate, survivor, was finally, truly home.